Hello Governor and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to successfully play the Beans on Toast Gambit. Now I'm sure many of you have heard of the Beans on Toast Gambit before, but I'm sure none of you have really got the confidence to play it as it's quite a high level opening. Of course there are a few variations of the Beans on Toast Gambit, however today I'm going to be showing you the typical normal variation of the Beans on Toast Gambit, and it does later develop into the double Beans on Toast Gambit. And that is, of course, a natural development of the Beans on Toast Gambit. So this is a game I played recently against a fairly minor opponent, especially compared to my skill level. I felt it was quite easy, but I do have a few good moves in here, and to be fair to my opponent, he did put up a good challenge at some points. So let's get straight into it. So to lay the foundations of the Beans on Toast Gambit, of course, you want to move your king's pawn forward 2 squares, and the typical response to this is your opponent to do the same. My next move was beginning the opening of the Beans on Toast Gambit, and that was moving forward my horse, sometimes known as the Beans, moving it forward to the f3 square. Now, one thing that many of you might not know about the Beans on Toast Gambit, it is actually called that because the horse is, of course, horse, that's where beans come from, and the pawn is, pawn represents the humans, and us humans, we make bread, and, that can be turned into toast. And also, this stage of the Beans on Toast Gambit can also be known as the toasting process. It's laying the foundation, so that is why it's, called the toasting process. It can also be called the bean cooker. However, I normally go for the toasting process. So my opponent's, the typical response to the toasting process is, to do this, as I think, he thinks I'm going for the, the typical 4 knights opening. However, he probably doesn't know about, the high level that is the Beans on Toast Gambit. Or he might not know the founding moves of it. So to finally open the gambit, you want to take the e5 pawn. And as you can see, my opponent accepts the gambit. And, the typical response to this is to go for the double Beans on Toast Gambit. So to do this, you push forward your d-pawn, and then your opponent will usually retreat his knight. And, then to get back into that toasting process, you want to bring out your other knight, and your opponent will respond by bringing out their knight usually. It's typical development at this stage. However, this is the when you finally play the double Beans on Toast Gambit. So you bring out your knight in front of your toast here, and your opponent will, of course, take the knight to accept the gambit, or they might decline it, to be fair. And in that case, I'll probably do a separate video at some stage on what to do if they decline the gambit. So finally, now you've completed the Beans on Toast Gambit, you want to get to the cooking process. You want to start going through the lunch, the dinner. And to do this, you want to, my usual response when they accept the gambit is to push forward my pawn as I do here. This puts pressure on their knight, and especially when you're in a low time game, they might make a mistake. And as you'll see here, my opponent does make the mistake of moving his knight here, and as you'll see, with the eval bar completely agrees with me that this is a very poor move. You want to know why this is a poor move? Well, say my opponent had let's just go back for a second. Say my opponent moved here. It's attacking that pawn. It's got that square to go to. It's got that square to go to. It's got that square to go to. It's got all those options in the future. However, as shown, my opponent, of course, did this. And the reason why this is a bad move is it limits the options of the knight. It's only got that move and that move. There's a terrible move. It's got, that option to be taken, that option to be taken. And say on my move, I pushed forward that pawn. It's got that option to be taken there as well. It really gives nowhere for the horse to run if I then start attacking it like that. Even if it goes there, can be taken there, and if it goes there, taken there. So that is why that is such a poor move from my opponent. So at this stage, I decided to continue with my development, and the only obvious move was, of course, to completely hang my bishop. The reason why this is such a natural move, he can bring out his queen and then start attacking my pieces with it, developing his queen, and I lose a bishop in the process. That's why it's such an incredible move, because your opponent will be so overwhelmed by this that he will just decide to check you with his bishop instead of taking the free bishop. In response to this, I decide to retreat my bishop rather than give up my queen. So I retreat my bishop, and in response to that, my opponent decides to take with his bishop. Now, rather than taking with my king to stop me from being able to castle, I take with my queen like that. And then this also puts some pressure on the knight as well. And in response to that, my opponent decides to play pawn to c6. There were better moves out there. In all fairness, he has done, I don't know if he did it on purpose or by accident, but I can no longer take that knight because he's got his queen looking at it like that. So that is at least protecting the horse. So overall, it's not too bad of a move. So to continue on my development, I decide to hang my other bishop. I hang this bishop. This is really to get into the head of my opponent. My opponent decides to take the free bishop and also attacks my queen in the process. And rather than defend my queen, I decide to go pawn to b3. This move here is such a good move because it gives up my queen. You know, a queen is quite a low level piece that you really want to give up quite early on into your games. And of course my opponent then decides to go for the pawn move and takes my queen. You know, silly opponent, am I right, guys? I decide to counter this by taking back with the king, which is actually the top engine move if you look up here. So I am pretty much a god at chess, so I play the top engine move. My opponent then fights back by taking my pawn on the d file. You know, that's something he lined up for a few moves now. He had that in his mind. I then continue some natural development by bringing out some of my pawns. So I do just want to point out the Avogadro staring contest that's going on between these two pawns here. And the move that my opponent plays next makes it a double Avogadro staring contest. That is the complex name of the what this is. Many of you may know it by the name of when you see a stranger in the street and you start walking towards each other and then one of you tries to go one way but you both go the same way, so then you go the other way. So you're kind of stuck like that, locked together. That's the more natural, you know, shorthand version of that name, but the big word for it is the Avogadro staring contest, and he makes it a double Avogadro staring contest with, you know, two people there. I counter this by checking his king. I do this because I think it might scare him. He counters this with quite a good move, really. It's the second best engine move. He blocks with his bishop, and then I proceed to play one of the most brilliant moves in my chess career. I push forward my f-file pawn. The reason why this is such a brilliant move is he cannot take, as that would leave me to checkmate him because it's not his move. So if he takes there, he can't. So he can't take there. So, you know, it basically just gives up a bishop. Admittedly, he could take with the pawn if I took with the bishop there. But his next move is a big blunder by my opponent. He pushes forward, and this is called an attempted Avogadro staring contest. The reason why it's attempted is because, you know, I have a way out of it. This is essentially like taking a left turn if you are walking towards someone in the street. You know, this is a little left, you know, a slip road to get out of the Avogadro staring contest. So I take his bishop, and then this is, you know, a great position for me here. He decides to make yet another big blunder. He castles. The reason why this is such a big blunder is it allows me to hit him with an amazing fork. You know, he really has nowhere to run. If he takes here, then I get a free queen, and it really develops my rook's position. If he pushes there, then I still get a free queen. And, you know, the only real way out of this fork for my opponent would have been pushing his queen there to check me like that. But he didn't see that at the time. You know, he's kind of a low-level player, as I mentioned earlier. So he decides to move his rook in front of my pawn. And I counter this by taking his queen. You know, a very good move. As you can see, this really swings the game back in my favor. I'm now up 8, opposed to him being, you know, which was previously up 9. Of course, it doesn't last for long, but, you know, it was nice at the time to be up on material for a bit. He counters by bringing out his other rook. Now, I'd say this is quite a good move, really, because when you do this, it develops your rook. You know, you got two little men stuck in front of your rook while it's here. You know, you don't really got anywhere to go with it. So, you know, it's quite a good move, really, for my opponent. We then continue on, and I decide at this stage that I want to trade off the rooks. I feel like I have the capabilities to beat this guy, just man-to-man in unarmed combat, so that's what I decide to do here. I trade off my rook, he takes, I then decide to go for the double trade, and he does one of the better moves of his game, and takes my rook before I can make that double trade happen. I do the best engine move, and I decide to take back with my king, sorry. And now it is just a battle of wits, really. So we decide to push forward our pawns. I could have taken there, but I decided I didn't want to until that move when I did decide to take. No, he starts pushing forward his king. I push forward another pawn. He takes, I take. He takes. You know, you think I'm in a rough position here because he has a passed pawn at this stage. I am. He keeps pushing forward that pawn. I decide to block with my king. He keeps pushing forward his king. So I push forward that pawn, and now he takes. And this is quite a bad blunder for me. I decide to take, and as you can see, that locks us into Avogadro's staring contest yet again. I have one pawn left, and I need to make sure I'm very careful with it, which I was not. He pushes forward his pawn again. Of course, I can't take because then kings would be touching. Very silly, very silly. Don't want to have a touching king. I decide to double push forward this pawn. And in this move, I could have lost the game. My opponent goes for the top engine move of taking the pawn. And now I'm in a very compromising position. I have both my pawns locked in an Avogadro staring contest, and I cannot cover off both of these, promotion squares at the same time. So I decide that I'm going to commit to attacking this pawn here. He pushes it forward again. I move my king over. He promotes to a rook. This is typical overconfidence from my opponent. So I take his pawn. He then brings his rook forward. Now this stage of the game really confused me. I could see what my opponent was going for. Much like how earlier in the match I was playing mind games, he started playing mind games with me. I move my pawn to d2. Now this is a very interesting move from my opponent. He decides in this position, 6.6 seconds on the clock, to sacrifice the rook! Now a very good move by my opponent. He was testing my mental fortitude. And if you see there, he took 0.1 seconds to make that move. So he clearly had this move in mind for a long time. I probably surprised him quite a lot here, and I take his rook. My opponent really only has one valid move and pushes his king forward to g4. I'm really at damage limitation at this stage. He has better positioning than me. I push my king up to e4, and now my opponent does possibly one of the best moves of his chess career. He decides to push his king to g3. And as you can tell by that evaluation bar, that put me up 72 points. That was the equivalent of sacrificing 8 queens in one move. I then continue with his blunder and push my king to f5. He continues to push his king back at this stage. Now, I have a theory about what my opponent was doing at this stage. I think he may have been a bit dyslexic and thought the board was round the other way. He's trying to get his king to a safe position. He's trying to block off these pushing pawns. Maybe he didn't realise that he can't push his pawns there and promote them like that. So unfortunately for my opponent, I then proceed to take his pawn. And I then proceed to go make a queen. And you can tell at this stage my opponent has realised his mistake. He starts, trying to get his king back to stop my pawn. However, it's just futile at this stage. I push forward, I get the queen. And my opponent, to try and make up for something to win 1 point of material back, decides to take my pawn. Like that. And at this stage, I then decide to play the brilliant move of queen to a7. Now, the reason I played this move is I realised that my opponent would not have the mental capacity to realise that I was going to completely sacrifice the game in one move. He had 1.7 seconds left on the clock. Now, that's not a heap of time, and that is the main reason I played this move, because I knew that he was so not expecting it that I could win by flagging him. And that is how I played my greatest chess game of all time using the Beans on Toast Gambit. If you enjoyed learning about the Beans on Toast Gambit, I'm happy to do more videos on more variations of the Beans on Toast Gambit. I'm also happy to, demonstrate more ways of defending from the Beans on Toast Gambit. And another defense that I've recently been playing up a lot more is the Crumpets and Toast the Crumpets and Toast defense. I think it's one of the better defenses in the game, and it's quite rare because it's quite a difficult one to play. But if you do want to see me play the Crumpets and Tea defense, please let me know in the comments down below, and I'll happily show you how to play the Crumpets and Tea defense. Anyway, I've been ChessGod05, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.